Story 1: The Watchers of Pine Ridge. I was 24 when I moved to Pine Ridge, a forgotten town nestled so deep in the Appalachian mountains that GPS gave up halfway there. The rental house I found was a weathered 2-story with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged like an old man's shoulders. But it was cheap, isolated, and exactly what I needed after my divorce left me broke and desperate for a fresh start. The house sat at the end of a gravel road that wound through dense pine forests. My nearest neighbors lived about 100 yards away, their property barely visible through the thick tree line. Their house was older than mine, a dark wooden structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Heavy curtains covered every window, and I never saw a single light burning inside, day or night. For the first week, I convinced myself I was alone out there. I'd sit on my porch with morning coffee, listening to the mountain silence, broken only by the occasional bird call or rustling leaves. It was peaceful in a way that made my chest feel lighter for the first time in months. Then I started noticing the figures. It began as glimpses caught in my peripheral vision, a shape moving between the trees, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. When I turned to look directly, nothing, just dark pines swaying in the mountain breeze. I told myself it was my eyes adjusting to the isolation, maybe deer or other wildlife. But the glimpses became more frequent, more deliberate. One evening, while washing dishes at the kitchen sink, I looked up through the window and saw them clearly for the first time. 3 people stood at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still, facing my house. They were too far away to make out details, but their posture was unmistakable. They weren't hiking or walking past. They were watching. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, calling out a tentative hello. The beam of light swept across the trees, but they were gone. No rustling branches, no footsteps crunching on dead leaves, just empty forest and the echo of my own voice. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound made me bolt upright, straining to hear through the walls. Around 3 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps on gravel. Slow, measured steps circling the house. I crept to the window and peered through the curtain, but saw only darkness. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt around my porch. 3 sets, different sizes, but all barefoot. The prints were unusually deep, as if whoever made them had been carrying something heavy. They circled the house twice before disappearing into the forest. I drove into town that day, hoping to ask someone about my neighbors. Pine Ridge's main street consisted of a gas station, a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, and a small grocery store. The woman behind the counter at the grocery store was friendly enough until I mentioned where I was living. "Oh, you're out by the Holloway place," she said, her smile fading. "Holloway place? The old house through the trees from yours. Family lived there for generations until..." She trailed off, suddenly very interested in organizing the cigarettes behind the counter. "Until what?" "Nothing, just old stories, people talk. She wouldn't meet my eyes. You might want to think about getting a dog for protection." I pressed her for more information, but she clammed up completely. The same thing happened when I tried asking at the diner. Friendly conversation until I mentioned my location, then sudden subject changes and nervous glances. Back at the house, I decided to investigate the neighboring property myself. The trees between our houses were thick but not impassable. I pushed through branches and undergrowth until I reached their yard. The house was even more unsettling up close. The dark wood siding was warped and splitting, and several windows were boarded up. But what made my skin crawl were the dolls. Hundreds of them hung from the porch rafters, trees, and makeshift posts throughout the yard. Some were obviously old children's toys, faded and missing limbs. Others looked handmade, constructed from sticks and scraps of fabric. All of them faced my house. Their button eyes and painted faces stared through the trees with an intensity that made me step back. Some swayed gently in the breeze, creating a soft rustling sound that somehow felt malevolent. I noticed that many of them had human hair sewn on, ranging from gray to brown to blonde. One doll near the porch had hair that looked remarkably similar to mine. I left quickly, pushing back through the trees with my heart hammering. That evening, I called my sister in Richmond and told her about the dolls. She suggested I was just spooked by the isolation and maybe I should come visit for a few days. I almost took her up on it. But that night, things escalated. I woke to the sound of my porch boards creaking. Not the random settling of old wood, but rhythmic creaking, as if someone was rocking back and forth. I grabbed my phone and crept to the front window. A woman sat in my rocking chair. She was elderly, wearing a faded floral dress, her long gray hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She rocked slowly, staring out at the forest. In her lap, she held a doll that looked exactly like me. Same hair color, same build, even wearing a tiny version of the pajamas I had on. I fumbled for my phone to call 911, but when I looked up again, she was gone. The chairs still rocked gently back and forth. The next morning, I found a new doll hanging from my mailbox post. It had my face. Not a resemblance or approximation. Somehow, impossibly, it had my exact face. The features were perfect, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. The hair was definitely mine. I recognized a particular cowlick pattern. I cut the doll down and threw it in my car, then drove straight to the sheriff's office in the county seat. The deputy who took my report looked tired and skeptical until I showed him the doll. His expression changed immediately. "Where exactly are you living?" he asked. When I told him, he closed the file folder. "Ma'am, I'm going to suggest you find somewhere else to stay, tonight." "What do you mean? What's going on?" He looked uncomfortable. The Holloway family, they had some unusual beliefs. Been gone about 15 years now, but folks still report strange things around that property. Dolls appearing, people watching from the trees. We've had 3 families move out of your rental in the past 5 years. "Why didn't the landlord tell me this?" "Property values," he shrugged. "Look, I can't force you to leave, but I strongly recommend it. And whatever you do, don't go back to that house tonight alone." I didn't listen. I couldn't afford to break my lease, and part of me was stubborn enough to refuse to be scared away by local superstitions. I drove back to the house as evening fell, determined to toughen it out. That was a mistake. I'd barely gotten inside when the knocking started. Not on the front door, but on every surface of the house simultaneously. Windows, walls, even the roof. Hundreds of small fists rapping in perfect unison. The sound was overwhelming, like being inside a drum. I grabbed a flashlight and looked outside. They were everywhere. Dozens of figures stood in my yard, on my porch, pressed against my windows. Men, women, children, all with the same pale, expressionless faces. They knocked in rhythm, never speaking, never blinking. Behind them, I could see the dolls from the neighboring yard. All of them. They had been cut down and now stood upright in neat rows, as if an invisible army was holding them. In the moonlight, their button eyes reflected like stars. I called 911, but the line was dead. My cell phone showed no signal. I was completely cut off. The knocking continued for hours. I huddled in my bedroom closet, flashlight dimming, listening to the relentless rhythm. Sometime near dawn, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, they were gone. All of them. The yard was empty.
Story 2. The Arrangement. When I moved to Millbrook Hollow, population 127, I thought I was getting a bargain. A 2-bedroom house with a view of the mountains, rent so low it seemed like a mistake. The landlord, a nervous man named Pete, who couldn't meet my eyes, kept emphasizing how quiet the neighborhood was, how the neighbors keep to themselves. I should have paid more attention to how he said it. The house was at the end of a dead-end road that curved around the base of a wooded hill. Only 4 houses total, spread out like afterthoughts. Mine was the newest, built maybe 20 years ago. The others looked like they'd been there since the mountains were young. My immediate neighbors were the Cades, an elderly couple who lived in the house directly next to mine. Our driveways were separated by maybe 30 feet of scrubby grass and a few tired-looking apple trees. Their house was old but well-maintained, painted a faded yellow with green shutters and a wide front porch lined with rocking chairs. They seemed normal enough at first. Martha Cade was a small, bird-like woman who wore house dresses and kept her gray hair in a tight bun. Her husband, Edgar, was tall and gaunt, with deep-set eyes and hands that shook slightly when he walked. They waved when they saw me, brought over a pie my first week, asked polite questions about where I'd come from and what brought me to their little corner of the world. But there was something off about their routine. Every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., Edgar would come out onto his porch and sit in the leftmost rocking chair. He'd rock slowly for exactly 1 hour, then go back inside. At 2:30 p.m., Martha would take the middle chair for exactly 1 hour. At 7:30 p.m., they'd both come out and sit together until full dark, then go inside simultaneously. The precision of it was unsettling. I could set my watch by their schedule. Rain or shine, hot or cold, they never varied by more than a minute or two. What made it stranger was how they sat. They never talked to each other during these porch sessions. They didn't read or listen to music. They just rocked slowly, staring out at the woods behind my house. Sometimes I'd catch them watching my windows, but when I waved, they'd look away without acknowledging me. After a few weeks, I started paying closer attention to their routine. I noticed that during Martha's afternoon session, she always held something in her lap. From a distance, it looked like knitting or sewing, but her hands never moved. She just held the bundle and stared. One afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I walked over during Martha's porch time and called out a friendly hello. She looked up, startled, clutching whatever she was holding against her chest. "Hi, Martha. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She nodded quickly but didn't speak. Up close, I could see that what she held wasn't knitting. It was hair. Long strands of different colors and textures braided together into thick ropes. Some looked gray like hers, others brown or black. Some strands looked almost blonde like mine. Interesting handiwork, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Martha's grip tightened on the braided hair. "It's for the arrangement," she said, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. "What arrangement?" But she was already standing, hurrying inside with quick, nervous steps. The screen door slammed behind her, and I heard the deadbolt turn. That evening, neither Edgar nor Martha came out for their usual evening session. Their porch remained empty, though I could see the glow of lamplight through the curtains. I tried to shake off the weird feeling the encounter had given me, but the image of those braided hair ropes stayed with me. A few days later, I found hair clippings scattered on my front porch. Not much, just small snippets of various colors and lengths. I swept them up, assuming it was some kind of animal nest material that had blown over from the woods. But the next morning there were more, and the morning after that. I started checking my porch every evening before bed. The hair was always there, as if someone was sprinkling it during the night. I never heard footsteps or saw anyone approaching the house. One night, I decided to stay up and catch whoever was doing it. I turned off all my lights and sat in my living room chair with a clear view of the front door. Around 2 a.m., I saw a figure creep across my porch. It was Martha, moving with surprising stealth for an elderly woman. She had something cupped in her hands, and as I watched, she sprinkled its contents across my doorstep with careful precision. I waited until she left, then crept outside with a flashlight. The hair clippings were still there, but now I could see they were arranged in a specific pattern. Not random scattering, but a deliberate design that looked almost like letters or symbols. The next day, I confronted Edgar when he came out for his morning porch session. "Your wife has been leaving things on my property, hair clippings arranged in some kind of pattern." Edgar stopped rocking and looked at me with those deep-set eyes. "It's for the arrangement," he said, using the same phrase Martha had used. "What is this arrangement? What are you talking about?" Edgar resumed rocking, staring past me toward the woods. "You'll understand soon enough. The arrangement keeps us safe, keeps the hollow quiet." Safe from what? But he wouldn't answer, just kept rocking and staring, ignoring my increasingly frustrated questions. That evening, I decided to investigate the woods behind my house. There had to be something back there that explained their behavior. I grabbed a flashlight and pushed through the tree line, following what looked like a worn path. About a quarter mile into the woods, I found it. A clearing, maybe 50 feet across, ringed by tall pines. In the center stood a structure that defied easy description. It looked like a giant bird's nest, but made from human artifacts. Furniture, clothing, books, toys, household items, all woven together with what looked like human hair. Hundreds of feet of braided hair held the entire structure together, creating a dome-like shape about the size of a small house. The smell was overwhelming. Not decay exactly, but age and mustiness and something else I couldn't identify. As I got closer, I could see that many of the objects in the structure looked relatively new. A child's backpack, a laptop computer, a woman's purse with the contents spilled out and woven into the hair matrix. At the base of the structure, I found photographs, dozens of them scattered in the dirt. They showed people I didn't recognize, but all the photos had something in common. They were clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. People getting out of cars, carrying groceries, working in their yards, candid shots of daily life. And at the bottom of the pile, I found photos of myself. Me bringing in my mail, me sitting on my porch with morning coffee, me loading groceries from my car. Someone had been watching me, documenting my routines since the day I moved in. I ran back to the house and immediately called the sheriff's department. The deputy who answered listened to my story with obvious skepticism until I mentioned the Cades by name. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to file a complaint about Edgar and Martha? They're well-respected members of that community. They've been spying on me and building some kind of shrine in the woods with my photographs." A long pause. "I'll send someone out to take a look." But no one ever came. The next morning, my car wouldn't start.
The battery was completely dead, though it had been fine the day before. When I called for a tow truck, the dispatcher said it would be at least 3 days before they could get to my location. The closest auto parts store was 20 miles away, too far to walk. I was effectively trapped. That afternoon, Martha didn't come out for her usual porch session. Neither did Edgar that evening. Their house was dark and quiet, but I could feel them watching me through those curtains. Around midnight, I heard voices in the woods, multiple people talking in low murmurs. I looked out my bedroom window and saw lights moving between the trees, flashlights or lanterns bobbing along the path toward the clearing. I should have stayed inside, should have locked the doors and waited until morning. Instead, I grabbed my own flashlight and followed them. The clearing was full of people, not just Edgar and Martha, but residents from other houses in the hollow, plus strangers I'd never seen before. Maybe 20 people total, arranged in a circle around the hair and debris structure. They were chanting something in low voices, words I couldn't make out from my hiding spot behind the trees. In the center of the circle, I could see someone kneeling, a young woman with long brown hair, her hands bound behind her back with braided ropes. My blood turned to ice when I realized I recognized her. She'd been in some of the photos I'd found, a previous tenant of my rental house. As I watched in horror, the chanting grew louder. The kneeling woman was lifted and carried toward the structure. I wanted to scream, to run for help, to do something, but my body was paralyzed with terror. That's when Edgar spotted me. He pointed directly at my hiding place and said something to the group. They all turned toward me, their faces pale and expressionless in the lantern light. I could see Martha among them, holding a long rope of braided hair. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes and face as I crashed through the woods toward my house. Behind me, I could hear them following, their voices raised now, no longer whispering. I reached my back door and fumbled with the lock, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I made it inside, and
I was desperate when I answered the classified ad for the rental house in Beacon Falls. 6 months of unemployment had burned through my savings, and I was down to choosing between food and rent. The listing was too good to be true. A furnished 2-bedroom house in the mountains, utilities included, for less than what most people pay for a studio apartment. The catch, according to the landlord, was the location. Remote, he'd said over the phone. Not everyone can handle the isolation. I assured him I could handle anything. I was wrong. Beacon Falls wasn't even a town, just a scattering of houses along a winding mountain road that seemed to lead nowhere. My rental sat halfway up a ridge, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides. The 4th side offered a spectacular view of the valley below, where fog collected in the mornings like spilled milk. The house itself was larger than I had expected, built in the 1970s with cedar siding and large windows designed to take advantage of the mountain views. It had obviously been someone's dream retreat once, though years of rental tenants had taken their toll on the furnishings. What made the location unique was the radio tower. It stood about 200 yards uphill from my house, a skeletal steel structure, maybe 150 feet tall, topped with various antennas and dishes. During the day, it was just an industrial eyesore against the mountain backdrop. At night, it became something else entirely. The tower was covered in lights. Not the standard blinking aviation warnings, but hundreds of small white lights arranged in complex patterns that pulsed and shifted throughout the night. Sometimes they cascaded from top to bottom like falling stars. Other times they spiraled around the tower's frame in hypnotic helixes. The display was beautiful and unsettling, casting shifting shadows across my yard and through my windows. I asked my landlord about it when I called to report a leaky faucet. "Oh, that's just the signal house," he said dismissively. "Some kind of government research station. They keep to themselves." Signal house.
That's what folks call it. Been there since the 80s. Don't worry about it. But I was curious. The tower clearly wasn't abandoned, and the light displays suggested sophisticated equipment. I could sometimes hear the low hum of generators running and occasionally caught glimpses of vehicles parked near the base, though I never saw anyone coming or going. After a few weeks, I decided to hike up and take a closer look. The path to the tower was well maintained, but unmarked. As I climbed, I noticed security cameras mounted on trees, their lenses tracking my movement. Posted signs warned against unauthorized access, mentioning federal prosecution and other unpleasant consequences. The tower itself was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Inside the compound, I could see several small buildings and an impressive array of electronic equipment. Everything looked expensive and well-maintained, clearly not some abandoned Cold War relic. What caught my attention was the sound. Even through the fence, I could hear a low-frequency humming that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It wasn't quite mechanical, more organic, like the breathing of some enormous creature. The sound came and went in waves, sometimes barely audible, other times strong enough to make my teeth ache. As I stood there listening, a figure emerged from one of the buildings. A woman in a white lab coat, middle-aged, carrying a clipboard. She walked directly to the fence and stared at me without speaking. "Sorry, I was just curious about the research station. I'm renting the house down the hill." She continued staring for a long moment, then turned and walked back to the building without acknowledging me. That night, the light display on the tower was more intense than usual. The patterns were faster, more agitated, and the colors had shifted from white to pale blue. The shifting light kept me awake, and around 2 a.m., I started hearing something else. Voices. Multiple people talking, but the words were unclear, muffled as if they were speaking underwater or through heavy fabric. The voices seemed to come from the direction of the tower, carried on the mountain wind. I opened my bedroom window and listened more carefully. The voices rose and fell with the humming sound, sometimes synchronizing with the light patterns. It was almost musical, like a complex choir performing some avant-garde composition. Over the next few days, I started noticing changes in my dreams. They became unusually vivid and strange, filled with geometric patterns and mathematical concepts I didn't understand. I'd wake up with fragments of equations in my head, complex formulas that dissolved when I tried to write them down. I also began experiencing what I can only describe as time slips. I'd start a simple task like washing dishes and suddenly realize hours had passed without my awareness. I'd be reading a book and discover I'd somehow skipped entire chapters without remembering. The phenomenon was disturbing enough that I made an appointment with a doctor in the nearest town, worried I might be having some kind of neurological episodes. But the doctor found nothing wrong with me. Blood work, reflexes, cognitive tests, everything was normal. "You mentioned you're living near some kind of research station. What type of research?" I realized I didn't know. Signal research, I think. My landlord called it the Signal House. The expression on the doctor's face changed slightly. "I've heard stories about that place. Folks have reported strange dreams, lost time, that sort of thing. Might want to consider finding somewhere else to live." But I couldn't afford to move. And besides, I was starting to become fascinated by the mystery. I began keeping a journal, documenting the light patterns, the timing of the humming sounds, the content of my strange dreams. What I discovered was that everything followed a precise schedule. The humming occurred every night between 11:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. The light patterns cycled through specific sequences, repeating every 72 hours. My time slips always happened during the most intense periods of activity. I also noticed that wildlife behaved strangely near the tower. Birds avoided flying directly overhead, even during migration. Deer and other animals gave the area a wide berth. On several occasions, I found dead insects scattered around my property, not killed by pesticides, but simply expired, as if they'd used up their life force all at once. 3 weeks into my stay, I encountered one of the researchers. I was hiking a different trail, one that curved around the base of the ridge, when I came across a man sitting on a fallen log. He wore the same white lab coat I'd seen on the woman at the fence, and he was staring up at the tower with an expression of intense concentration. Beautiful, isn't it? The tower? The signal? Can you hear it? I listened. The humming was audible even in daylight, though much fainter than at night. What kind of signal is it? He turned to look at me, and I was struck by how tired he looked. Deep circles under his eyes, pale skin like he hadn't slept in weeks. "We're listening," he said. "Always listening. The signal comes from very far away, and we have to be ready when it arrives." Signal from where? Not where, when. He stood up, brushing dirt from his coat. "You should leave this place. It's not safe for civilians during an active listening period." "What do you mean, not safe?" But he was already walking away, disappearing into the forest with surprising speed. That evening, the activity at the tower intensified beyond anything I had experienced. The lights flashed so rapidly that they created a strobe effect that penetrated my closed curtains. The humming was so loud I could feel it in my bones, and the voices in the wind became clearly audible. They weren't speaking English. The language was complex and musical, with tonal qualities that reminded me of whale songs. But somehow, impossibly, I began to understand fragments of meaning. Not words exactly, but concepts that appeared directly in my mind. They were coordinates, temporal coordinates. The beings, and I was somehow certain they were beings, not humans, were discussing time in ways that hurt to think about. Past and future as navigable dimensions, events that had already happened but could still be changed, causality loops and probability cascades. I grabbed my journal and started writing frantically, trying to capture the concepts before they slipped away. My handwriting became increasingly erratic as the night progressed, eventually dissolving into diagrams and symbols I didn't consciously understand. When I woke the next morning, I found pages of notes in my own handwriting that I had no memory of creating. The symbols looked vaguely familiar, like half-remembered fragments of dreams, but I couldn't decipher their meaning. More disturbing was the realization that I'd lost an entire day. According to my journal, it was Thursday, but I clearly remember it being Tuesday when I'd started writing. Somehow, 24 hours had vanished completely. I called my landlord and told him I needed to break the lease immediately. "Having trouble with the isolation?" he asked, but his tone suggested he wasn't surprised.